everyone. I'm Kareem Rae, your host at the One Soccer Nation podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Lyle Adams. Lyle is the chief dreamer at Spry and a former MLS player. Lyle, thank you so much for taking the time today. How you doing?
First of all, thank you for having me, Kareem. Been a big fan of the podcast, so honored to be a guest today. Looking forward to chatting with you, sharing my story, and passing some knowledge along.
Absolutely. So, one of my favorite questions to ask is, how did you get involved in the beautiful game?
I don't know. I have to ask my parents to be honest. Of all my childhood memories, most of them were on a soccer field, the pictures I have. So I'm guessing my parents are Jamaican. So I'm guessing my dad tried to teach me soccer at a young age. I did hear I was left-footed until I hurt my right foot as like a 3-year-old. And then I became right-footed. But that's the kind of that extent. I don't really know what that catalyst was, but I'm pretty sure my parents were like, let's go have him run outside in Florida. So he tires out. And eventually I became pretty good at soccer as a little kid.
Nice. I mean, Kingston, Jamaica, people from Jamaica are really big about football. They don't really call it soccer much, but yeah, definitely, one of my favorite places in the world is Jamaica. It's heaven on earth to me. Um, I just want to kind of quickly share the story of how we connected. I came across your interview on the Family Office. I do subscribe to them. And I watched your interview and I was like, okay, I wonder if I have this person on LinkedIn. And I searched, I seen you on LinkedIn and we were already connected. So I was like, perfect, this is great. And reached out and was wondering if you would be interested to be on the podcast. And now here we are. You're a former MLS player. So not everyone gets to make it to the big leagues. And, back in your time, you've made it to the big leagues. What was it like going from amateur to becoming a professional soccer player?
I mean, first of all, like I said, it was a great honor. I mean, MLS now and MLS then are two different things in that the league wasn't as established as it is now, so there weren't many roster spots. So I was fortunate enough now to make one of those roster spots. Yeah, I didn't get any game time, but to your point, I still made a roster spot. So I'm forever grateful and humbled by that opportunity. But I would say the biggest difference for me going from being an amateur, i.e. a college professional soccer player, to going to MLS or just the pro game was the physicality and the strength of everyone, right? Like in college, you're kind of one of the, being a senior, you're kind of one of the stronger people just by definition because you got age on everyone else. You go to professional ranks now, everyone is strong, everyone is fast, everyone is talented. So just getting used to the physicality was one thing, or just the constant pace of the game. Right. In college, you unfortunately, like I said, you don't have to be engaged for 90 minutes. You can be engaged for 88 minutes. Pros, you got to be engaged for 90 minutes plus the 30 minutes before, and now the 2 hours after to take care of your body. So it's kind of a different experience. But like I said, really grateful, played with some wonderful players when I was a professional. So just very honored to have that kind of opportunity.
Absolutely. The thing that really caught my attention in that interview was when you talk about the transition from player to entrepreneur to tech. Not a lot of players plan their exit while they're in their career, and you really, you spoke about that a lot. But actually, before we get into that, what do you think, playing in the MLS did for you professionally?
I mean, it allowed me to get a job if I'm being honest, full disclosure. The person who hired me for my first job outside was like, oh, I was a DC United fan. And that was kind of the initial segue into us having a conversation during an interview. And it kind of really, I would say, settled me. So I wasn't very, very nervous. It's like, oh, like, I don't have a lot of work. But he's like, hey, man, like I followed you. I mean, I've seen you play before. And that was kind of like, oh, we have a mutual connection that we could have a proper conversation. But to your point, the transition was it was challenging. So, to be pretty frank, me somewhat thinking about what was next, I think might have now somewhat hindered my career. Because I think to be successful, you kind of have to be, this is all I can now do, completely be in the moment. I'm not saying I didn't take my job seriously, but I also kind of now knew, hey, the writing's on the wall. Like, I'm not making that much money. I'm on the back end of the roster, right? Like, I'm not getting many minutes. So the end might be sooner than sooner than I anticipate, right? And very few people have what, the Kobe where you can now decide to retire. Many people are told that they're not good enough anymore. And that's kind of, was in the back of my head, was started allowing me to start looking for options. But I would say the transition into tech was good and bad in that I was hungry and coachable, which was awesome because I was at an environment that wanted me to learn or be hungry to grow. So that was you matched two passions. The downside was I kind of had to get used to a corporate environment, which is very different than a locker room, right? Banter, that work ethic, timing is a very different environment. So good and bad. I chose tech because at the time, tech was more about having people who could contribute immediately, like hands on keyboards, right? Butts and seats, instead of having like a nice pedigree or a background. Because unfortunately, I didn't have that coming out of being a former soccer player because soccer was my job. So yes, there are transferable soccer skills to the workplace, but some of them didn't really go on a resume when you had no job experience back in the day. So it was kind of a natural. It was a good feeling for me when I could finally land a job.
Mhm. What advice would you give players in regards to going pro?
There's a lot of sacrifices that you have to make to be successful at that level that the common person is not willing to acknowledge or aware of. So if you want to now have that outcome or reach that plateau, it comes with a lot of sacrifice. Not only sacrifices for yourself, sacrifices for your loved ones, like not being able to go out, right? Like, because you're going to do fitness at 7 a.m., where you're hitting the gym to go hit balls early in the morning, or you're doing some work there. It's a lot of dedication and passion that you might not see in the 90 minutes on the field. But that's just the test. You have to now study and prepare yourself. And I think that's the biggest thing I would tell a young professional now. It's like, hey, Sundays or Saturdays is the test, but you got to put in work now Monday through Friday to get there or ace that test, right? And once you do well on that test, you can't really stop there because you got a lot more tests coming forward, and there's always someone like who wants what you have, so you kind of have to work for it, is what I would say. But at the same time, also enjoy the moment. Like looking back at it, like I was happy. I was happy. I think I was a good teammate. Like enjoy those moments because when you get there, it's a lot quicker than you think it is. I think the average professional career is less than 3 years. I've been, I founded my company over 3 years ago. And if you put things into consideration, like I've been a CEO longer than I played professional soccer. So like really enjoy the moment when you can because it's really, really special and not many get to that plateau. So sitting back and saying, hey, I've now achieved something is something you should do. But at the same time, how do you keep pushing yourself forward to be better? Or how do you now move the needle forward, right?
Absolutely. Can you give players a perspective in regards to what went into your planning in regards to your transition from playing to exiting your playing career to now going into the corporate space and then coming through the journey of starting up your own company?
Great question. I would say there were some things I did well back then. There's some things I would do again. Like if I was now looking at playing and looking at my transition, I would do every event that the club would offer. Any paid appearance I would go to. Back then I was kind of like, I don't really want to go. But looking at it now, those are really great ways to still be committed to your craft, but you get a chance now to meet other people in the industry. I was good about though connecting and staying in touch with people, but I played before you had LinkedIn. So I think little things like that I would now do differently, like going to events, connecting with people in the local community, like going to youth soccer events with the coaches and different folks there, because that kind of allows you at the end of the day now to meet parents. And as crazy as it sounds, these parents have jobs. They own companies in the local community. They can now help you transition if that's what you desire. Whereas I kind of learned or saw that towards the tail end of my career. Whereas if I were to go back, I probably would have started a bit earlier in my career just to have a bigger Rolodex of people. Um, the transition from playing to corporate life was somewhat challenging, if I'm being pretty direct. it wasn't the work, it was more of um, the internal struggle that you have as an individual. At least I had as an individual, right? Because like for so long, I was always Lyle Adams, a soccer player.
Mm.
I have other hobbies besides soccer. Like I like to bake, I like Rubik's cubes, I like puzzles, right? Like I like math, but it was always Lyle Adams, a soccer player. And all of a sudden, in 15 minutes, I was no longer a soccer player. So you kind of have this disassociation of your identity that you as a person, you kind of have to find, or you have to be comfortable with your career ended. And I think that was the hardest part of the transition. Not saying that I was saying, oh, I'm not good enough. They were better players than me, full disclosure, right? I was a good player, but they were better players than me. But I was just trying to figure out who I was when someone said I was no longer good enough to do that anymore was the hardest part. Once I kind of found peace with that decision myself, finding a job was just now interviews, networking, meeting people to get a job. But the hardest part was just coming to the realization of saying, am I at peace with how my career ended in general? The working aspect is, I would say it's tricky. Like, unfortunately, nothing is given to you in corporate life like on the playing field. You have to work for everything. So this is, like I said, now practicing, having multiple resumes, things that I learned along the journey, which I'm forever grateful for passing back to those who ever want to connect or discuss. But that was kind of the hardest entry point into corporate life was knowing what to do to get a job because I never had to do anything. Whereas soccer, you try out, you just play. Like if you're good, someone will come say, "Hey, come play for me," or like, "Here's my call." It's a lot easier playing soccer to get your next contract than it is to now get a job, right? So that was kind of I would say the time or the trick for me was to figure out those little subtleties that now come from, interviewing and working in, corporate America.
Understood. So after playing and then transitioning into the business side of sports, with ventures like Spry, a company that you did start up, you know, transitioning from now corporate to starting your own company is a completely different ball game in itself too. And you like myself, starting up on Soccer Nation, I know it's not easy to create a startup, and it takes a lot of legwork. So, could you share with us why you started Spry and what is Spry?
I would say Spry is an athletics management company. So we work with colleges, junior colleges, any institution of higher education right now to manage all of their athlete records, scheduling, facility management, roster management. So anything that an administrator or a staff now needs to keep track of their athletes so their athletes are eligible to play, Spry does. So right now we work with over 150 colleges nationwide, all divisions, all shapes and sizes. So it's been really rewarding to see our growth so far. But you're spot on. Startup life is hard. I tell people all the time. Growth is not linear. What you put in doesn't always come out instantaneously, right? You can put in a lot really early on, but it's going to take you a while to get your first customer. And maybe your second customer doesn't really mean it's not working, just the reward benefit is not the same in business as it is in soccer or being an athlete. Like I said, look, you now know if you do those 10 extra sprints, you'll see that in a week when you're stronger at practice or you can run longer at practice. Me now sending 10 extra emails, I might not see the benefit of that not for 6 months or 12 months, but the same kind of thing lies there. What prompted me to start the company was an opportunity. Like I saw something in the space that was just not there. However, though, I didn't really dive in. I spent tons of time doing research. Being a former athlete, you're fortunate enough that many of your former teammates at some point become coaches or administrators or people in the sports adjacent business. So you can have a lot of conversations with them to figure out what was there and what was not there. And once I felt really comfortable about knowing the market's pros and cons and potential areas of opportunity, that's when I decided to start a company. But long story short, like I said, it was hard. Like I think I went 1 for 59 until I signed my first customer.
Hmm.
And it's like 1.4%. Not really a great number, but like it took a while to get there. I tell people all the time, yes, you have a company, but you don't really have a company until someone is willing to pay for you.
Mm.
But at the same time, like you're going to go through a lot more, you hear a lot more no's than yeses as you're an entrepreneur, but you can't really let the no's detract you from your vision as long as you put in the work, right? But I now knew I've done my homework for 6 months. I've done my homework, so this will now take time to get there. It took, like I said, 1 out of 59 to get there, but once we've gotten there, it's become a bit easier now to grow and sell, but you have to remain very, I would say, even keel as anyone who founds your own company, because you hear a lot more no's than yeses. But when you hear a yes, you can't really get overexcited because you need a lot more yeses to be successful.
Yep.
But at the same time, you kind of need to celebrate those little milestones. It's like a forward, right? You kind of want to have a quick memory as a forward or even a defender. Like you're gonna get beat as a defender. Doesn't mean you're a bad defender, but you statistically you're gonna get beat, right? And as a forward, you're gonna miss a chance. But like how quickly do you rebound and say on to the next one? Because the good forwards now have that quicker memory and they don't let these short-term setbacks cause long-term problems.
100%. That's a great on-field example. Um, how much time did it take you to build your company before you started to, did you start selling first or did you raise capital before you started to sell?
We started building, we started, it was a combination. I started selling first. And to be honest with you, it was a hybrid. I was selling at the same time. I did some of the building, but what I built was more of the foundational pieces that were very like quote unquote modular. So it's easy for me to plug and chug once I got more context. But I did a lot of selling to figure out truly what the market wanted. I'm a big proponent of any founder selling. Like you kind of have to know your product to sell it. And it's really hard to have someone else now sell it on your behalf if you can't sell it, right? It just is like, entrepreneurship 101. But these conversations were really insightful for me in that it allowed me to understand truly what my customers wanted, what they wanted to do. And from there, it was easier now to build. But building software takes time. I think we were building 7 months before someone actually used something. Like 7 months of dev work before I could actually put it in a customer's hands. And that's the downfall of selling B2B software. It's a good thing. It just takes time, but it takes time, which is the flip side, right? You can't have the best of both worlds there. But it was a good journey. Like there were many long nights and early mornings, or like, oh, I don't believe they didn't sign. But for every customer that didn't sign, I would now look back at my notes and think about why they didn't sign. And when I actually did that exercise, I realized I'm actually a lot closer than I thought I was. Because it wasn't people saying, oh, no one will ever buy this, right? Oh, do you have this feature? Like, well, have you thought about this? It was kind of little subtle things that we could address. Or they would say, hey, wow, this looks great. Do you do anything else? Like there were a lot of building blocks within these conversations and say, hey, I'm on the right path. Whereas no one was saying, oh, this is a terrible idea. Right. And it would hang up. They would have a conversation. We would give them some quotes. They go, hey, we like what you're building, but we want to go with someone who is a bit more experienced working with colleges. I'm saying, okay, it's disappointing, but it's not the end of the world. Like I was a finalist. Like let's go get some wins and come back to the table. That's kind of where we're at now. We've started stacking together some wins, and we've been able now, to be honest with you, sign a lot of schools as the collegiate athletics landscape changes.
Amazing. And it must it must feel amazing to be in a position of, we have a product or service, and we're at a different position. We have all the pieces that we're missing before in these previous conversations, and now going into new conversations. It's kind of like you get those one-off closings right away. So, I mean, gaining that momentum of where you guys are now is super exciting. And yeah, we're working towards that right now as we speak, and it feels good, for example, from podcasting. I've been podcasting for the last 4 years with One Soccer Nation, and the first 2 years was a lot of reaching out, and now the last last 2 years, the snowball's kind of down the hill, and it's usually, introductions or people reaching out to us, or if I'm asking someone like yourself to come on, it's a straight yes. So it's really nice to have that momentum on your side of the less knows.
No, I fully agree with you. It's human psychology doesn't like no in general.
Yeah.
Just a human being, you like hearing no consecutively. And you hear no now for 6 months, it's tough. Like, personally, like if someone reaches out, I always try to respond to your message, whether I can speak to you or not. I just think I make it an effort to try to respond because I've been on the other side being ghosted. It's not really a great feeling, right? When you pour your heart and soul and you just get no responses. So I definitely I understand your perspective, and for me, there's still a lot of room to grow. Like if it makes you feel any, I'll give you some, some flowers. I had a 1v1 with a guy on my team earlier, and he's familiar with your podcast. He
Oh,
also
wow.
played soccer. I mentioned, he asked what I was doing this afternoon. I said, I have a podcast. He goes, oh, I've listened to those guys before. They're great. But he also played college soccer. So like kudos to you. So your brand is a lot bigger than you are aware of. But that's similar for me. It's just humbling when someone says, "Oh, I've heard of them. They do good work," and you're like, "Oh, wow, it's great." But to your point now, this is 4 years in the making,
4 years. Yeah,
and you can start seeing the flowers from all that journey.
absolutely. So, as a venture partner at HL Ventures, you support mission-driven founders. Can you discuss the importance of investing in diverse and impactful ventures and how you decide which startups to support?
First of all, as a minority, unfortunately, capital has not always been readily accessible to minorities and underrepresented groups. So, the founding team at HL Ventures, I've actually met when I lived in California years ago. We've always stayed in touch. And I was always like very well impressed by their vision and their thesis about uh, representing those who don't have a lot of access. So when I was given the chance to be a venture partner, I immediately jumped on it. Personally, I think a lot of people just need some opportunity, right? I think there's a lot of good in the world, but some people just don't have the same access and opportunity as others. And that's kind of now partly of how I see it. Like obviously, from an investment standpoint, I have to think your business is viable, right? But early stage investing, you're kind of betting on three things if you truly want to be honest, right? The person, somewhat the space, and the person,
The job,
right?
of course.
Right. Like you can bet on certain spaces, but like if you don't have the team to execute or like you can't really control that. Timing plays a big role in certain things, which I think people are underestimating. Like, I'll give you three real life examples of like why timing is so crazy. If you think about Blu-ray as a company or a product, they existed and they didn't exist overnight. They really didn't do anything wrong, right? What happened to Blu-ray as a technology was technology became so much faster that you could compress video a lot quicker than people thought they could compress video. Because you went from having a DVD to a Blu-ray, and all of a sudden your laptop didn't even have a CD-ROM drive anymore because people could compress videos instantaneously, right? 18 months. Look at now TomTom and Garmin. Like I'm a bit older, right? So like when I used to go to soccer tournaments, I would have to print off the directions via MapQuest and have them in my car. And I'd read them to my mom or dad about what we would need to go now because you didn't have GPS virtually. Then you had a TomTom or Garmin that you could put on the windshield, and many of us had that for 2, 3 years. Then all of a sudden, your smartphone became so much better that they could now triangulate and do GPS instantaneously that no one had a TomTom or Garmin anymore. Right, so timing is everything. If TomTom and Garmin they were just unlucky because the phone became so much more powerful before they could pivot. Like TomTom doesn't really exist as such as it used to be, but Garmin can pivot and become a watch. They have a lot of like wearable technology now, but timing is everything. And I guess the last piece, even looking at my former employee, Uber. If Uber, the idea of Uber was happening 3 years before, the smartphone is not smart enough for Uber to work. And if Uber happens 18 months, 24 months later, maybe a competitor does it or someone else now thinks of the idea. So Uber was right place, right time at the intersection of a want and need. And that's what I kind of tell, people as I look at ventures, like, yes, do I think you have it as an entrepreneur? Are you going to be able to now grind through these ups and downs that you eventually will have? But do I kind of like the space? Is kind of how I invest. Others now invest in different criteria, and I think all investors are unique. But for me, the big thing is like, have you done your homework and diligence, or are you okay? Because most early investments fail. Like, but like, there's a lot that comes with that. But I'm like, am I betting on the person? And my answer is like, do I think Kareem will succeed? If the answer is yes, most times I'm going to write you a check. If I'm being 100% honest, if I think you got the chops, right? But everyone is different. That's kind of my personal thesis. But like, being a minority and underrepresented founder, unfortunately, I'm judged differently than some of my peers and colleagues. And now seeing that firsthand, and that was kind of what drew me to the venture space or investing in underrepresented founders. Is like, hey, you got to do twice as much work to get half the credit. But if you're doing twice as much work, it means your product is probably superior. I need to go right on you because like you don't have the same benefit as someone else. And that's kind of why I'm somewhat like, more geared towards supporting women and minority founders.
Understood. My last question is, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs?
One, find an outlet. I think if you were a solo founder, it's very, very lonely because you don't have anyone to share your frustrations or setbacks or a way to vent. And unfortunately, you cannot bottle these up inside much because you'll blow up. So find a way to release or get it out. Like mine is soccer. I still try to knock the ball around, or I'll go to the movies, right? Like by myself, just to like clear my head. But I find finding an outlet is really important for an entrepreneur because like you'll have good days and you'll have bad days, right? But like being able to now decompress and separate those bad days is very, very critical because you could work 20 hours a day truly if you wanted to because it's your baby or your passion project, but you kind of have to find a way to break is one. Two, I would say don't get too high, don't get too low.
Hmm.
It ties into one. If you can limit the swings of your emotion, you'll be more successful. Because then you'll have good days and you'll have bad days. And if you have a bad day, don't blow everything up. It was just a bad day, right? Like, and for example, like we lost a customer, decided to sign with one of my competitors a couple weeks ago. Okay, I didn't blow up my roadmap. It was one customer. Mind you, I went 10 for 10 the week before, but naturally I was going to lose someone. But it wasn't like, oh my gosh, like the world's on fire. It was just, okay, unfortunate. What did we learn from this? Is I would say that instead of, like I said, being even keeled. And the last piece was try to end the week better than you started it,
Mhm.
right? And it doesn't have to be a lot, right? Because some weeks I could have three losses, but if I learn something from those three losses and I can apply those losses to my next thing, I think I've now been half a step forward than where I started the week. So I tell people naturally, thinking that you're going to now take three steps forward every week, not the case. If I take three steps forward this week and I take one step backwards, I'm still plus two. That's a good week. Right? Some weeks might be plus five, but some weeks could be negative two. But for me, can I learn something from those less than ideal opportunities or scenarios? If I can learn something from them, I can still now bring this now forward. Is for me what I tell people as an entrepreneur. It's not all pretty sailing, but like, are you constantly learning and improving? Because if the answer is yes, I think you're in the path to be successful.
Absolutely. Well, Lyle, that was amazing advice. So much value being shared here. I just really want to take the time to, again, thank you for taking the time for being on the One Soccer Nation podcast.
Like I said, thank you so much for having me. If anyone's interested in reaching out, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Lyle Adams on LinkedIn. Thank you once again to Kareem and the entire One Soccer Nation family.
Thank you.